Hello and welcome to this installment of Vox Machina. As your narrator, I'll be bringing fantastic works of fiction from the page to your eardrums. Uploads will be posted weekly, so be sure to subscribe and hit the alerts bell to be notified when new installments are available. Got a story you think deserves the Vox Machina treatment? Let me know in a comment and you might just hear it in a future episode. Thanks for listening and on with the show. In Bad Faith by Fencer X. Episode 8. Grimmauld Place was in much the same state as he'd left it. Still empty, still overly furnished, still a pureblood's wet dream and a muggle-born's nightmare. Harry called out a greeting to Creature, who, from the smell of things, was just frying up breakfast in the kitchen downstairs and went to start unpacking. And if Harry felt a little lonely, a little bit out of sorts, a little bit, well, he reminded himself he'd felt much the same way when he'd moved out of the dorms at Hogwarts, and this too would pass. And it did pass, in large part because the DMLE seemed intent to make up for the month on holiday, though as far as their records showed he'd been laid up with Spattergroit, by tossing Harry at every dull task that moved. It was back to tracking down lost Neasels and offering tourists directions to Diagon Alley for Harry, and probably would be for the foreseeable future. Work was tedious, but when had it not been? Just another couple of months and he'd be rotated out, and maybe then he'd get some assignments that actually involved aura work, even if that work was recharming the ever-full teapot and emptying the rubbish baskets. He'd been back at work nearly 2 weeks, though, when he was interrupted in the middle of a very strange dream involving Creature and Old Byrne fusing into an ultra-house elf that referred to him as Masterful Oaf and somehow looked uglier than the sum of its parts, by Old Byrne himself, slapping him lightly on the cheeks until he roused. "Yes, thank you, Old Byrne," someone said. Harry was only half awake and didn't have his glasses on, so his focus was in tatters. "Wait in the hallway while I have a word with our errant Potter." Oh, wait. He'd heard that snide tone before. "The fuck are you doing in my room at what I'm sure is an absolutely ungodly hour?" "Yes, always a delight to see you too, dearest. Now, sit up and get your head on straight. I'm in no mood to deal with your usual slow uptick." Harry was distantly aware he ought to be offended, but was still too tired to feel it. But Draco's tension and panic flowing into Harry via the influx, magnified now they were in such close quarters, helped quickly clear the cobwebs from his mind, and he eased upright, a pillow across his midsection for modesty's sake. Draco didn't need to see the little animated snidgets flitting across his crotch on the joke boxes he'd received last Christmas, and rubbed his eyes, stifling a yawn. Right. Is that a reason whatever this is couldn't wait till morning? Or, like, the weekend, maybe? Draco shoved his hand into Harry's face, a big blur without his glasses, but he at least recognized it was the left hand and surmised this was probably his ring he was nearly braining Harry with. He groped on the nightstand for his glasses, which helpfully leapt into his hands, thanks to a handy charm Hermione had developed for him for his birthday the previous year. "I can't take it off." Harry's brain was still running 2 minutes behind schedule. "Come again?" "The fucking ring. I can't take it off." Harry frowned, looking at the ring 2 inches from his nose, then to the murderous expression on Draco's face, then back to the ring again. "Tried greasing it? Maybe some dish soap? You didn't accidentally epoximize it, did you?" Harry didn't know how one might accidentally cast a permanent sticking charm, but stranger things had happened, surely. Draco released a low growl of frustration, snatching his hand back. "I don't mean I can't take it off. I mean I did." And? Harry didn't know if it was his brain being befuddled by the lack of sleep, or if Draco had had one too many of Old Byrne's toddies before retiring for the evening, but he wasn't making a lick of sense. He dropped his voice as if he thought someone might overhear. Perhaps he was worried about Wahlburger's portrait 4 floors down. "And I turned back into a fucking peacock." And now Harry was fully awake, heart in his throat. He thought Draco might have felt the echo of the panic that speared through him, for his already white face seemed to blanch further. But we did the ritual, and we finished the 30 days, and..." He frowned, taking in Draco now from his very frazzled hair, half out of its plate, down to his comfortable, sensible slippers. "And you're human now?" If this had been the curse taking effect, it would have done so on Draco's birthday, right? And he wouldn't have turned back into a human. Oh, so those glasses aren't just for show. Well spotted. Of course I'm a human now. All right. Keep your pants on. I'm just trying to settle things in my head since you apparated into my room in the middle of the night. I didn't apparate here. Old Byrne did. And on that note, adjust your wards to let me in next time. We're married for the time being, at least, so it only seems fair. Harry rubbed his face, in no mood to deal with Draco's ridiculousness at this hour. Right, why exactly are you here then? You had another fit? And what was this about your ring? Draco sighed loudly as if Harry were being purposefully obtuse and sat down on the edge of his mattress, though at the very end giving Harry and his semi-nudity a wide berth. Rich coming from a fellow who seemed to think appropriate bedclothes were none, even when he had guests in his home. I thought, since the consummation clause had been satisfied and the appropriate paperwork filed, and of course since I was still myself, then I didn't need to wear this stupid hunk of metal anymore, so I took it off. I paid for that, you know. No one said you had to make it so atrociously gaudy. Maybe if you wanted me to keep it on, you would have invested in a simple silver band. I can't believe you're still wearing yours. Well, he wasn't. That is, technically he was, but thanks to a neat bit of charm work, no one at the ministry had noticed. No sense in riling up the mass as he'd figured, and better to keep it on in case it was tied to the ceremony. He'd meant to ask Hermione about it, just to be sure, but it kept slipping his mind. Right, excuse me for putting a bit of thought into it, he muttered, knowing full well the designs had been entirely Hermione's doing. Anyway, I slipped the thing off and went to place it in my jewelry box. You have a jewelry box? When the moment it left my finger, I succumbed to a transformation, and fuck, I'd forgotten how much those things hurt. He shuddered, ignoring Harry entirely. And I panicked because, well, this wasn't supposed to be happening still, and I tried to get the ring back, but birdbeaks have shit dexterity, and I wound up swallowing the damn thing. And then, apparently swallowing it equated to enough contact to allow me to turn back into a human, which I'll admit was a massive relief, except then the ring was still inside me, and I had to wait until... He cut himself off, swallowing with a grimace, and Harry pressed him after a moment. Until, Draco bit out very slowly, I shat the ring out. Oh, gross, and he just waved it in Harry's face. At which point I, of course, promptly turned into a fucking peacock again, and then I had to... He covered his mouth. I had to dig through my own shit to find the ring and get it back onto a claw so I could finally transform back. He sighed. So that's been my past few days. How have you been, darling? Better than Draco, he figured, since none of his activities of late had involved his own feces, and hopefully never would. You scourgified that thing, right? Really got into all the little grooves and all... Draco showed him a couple of fingers, which he supposed meant obviously. So what does this mean? If you take the ring off, you transform into the peacock again? Immediately? It would appear so, and this time I don't change back, not unless I don the ring again. Well, that was a predicament to be certain. All right. Well, I mean, on the bright side, you did transform back, which means as long as you keep the ring on, you should be fine, right? No, not fucking right! Draco punched the bedsheets, fist clenched. You understand this means I'm stuck like this now, right? That I have to wear this damn ring for the rest of my life? There's no divorce coming, no annulment, for you or me. And, that wasn't something Harry had really considered until just this moment, but Draco was already drowning in self-pity, no time to fret about how this twist might affect his non-existent social life just now. My parents never said it had to be permanent. They just told me if I complied with the terms in the poem, I'd be spared. Well, I guess they figured complying with the terms would involve you getting married to someone you actually tolerated. I wouldn't mind wearing the ring forever. Draco was moaning in despair now, flopping down on Harry's bed, spread eagle, and looking terribly pathetic, but his dramatic display belied the real, authentic fear and panic that were threatening to subsume him even now. And suddenly the tension and stress that had been dogging Harry for these past few days made a lot more sense. He'd initially brushed off the feelings as growing pains from being back at work after an extended holiday, plus it made sense that he'd feel off, having the routine he'd only just gotten used to disrupted. Now, though, recognizing this was only the influx working its nasty magic upon them even over a great distance, he saw that this was going to have to be dealt with. He shifted closer to Draco, patting him gamely on the shoulder. Even now, he was practically radiating waves of panic that Harry probably could have felt even without the aid of the influx. This brush with his curse had truly rattled him, even if he had transformed back, and Harry supposed it made sense. They'd thought they'd had the curse managed, that they'd be able to go about their business as usual, only sticking with this marriage long enough for Hermione to do what she always did and find them a way out. There had been a comfortable little buffer insulating Draco, from the threat of the curse. But now he'd just seen that all it would take was the ring being slipped from his finger and he'd be stuck as a fucking peacock forever. What happened, Harry wondered, if his ring were somehow destroyed? Could they commission a new one and slip it on his finger, or was this thin band of metal all that stood between Draco and an eternity in a downy white coat? Harry didn't doubt Draco himself was obsessing over these same what-ifs, which could only pan out poorly for the both of them. "Come on," he said, nudging Draco's shoulder. "Sit up, you're getting hair everywhere. Creature will be finding long white hairs around here till Christmas." Draco reluctantly allowed himself to be manhandled into a seated position and began nervously picking at the plait he'd bound his hair into, or what was left of it. "Where are we, even?" "Number 12, Grimmauld Place," Harry said. "Used to belong to the Black family, but passed to me when the last heir died." "The last heir didn't die," Draco spat. "He's sitting right here." Harry frowned, not following, and Draco gestured around the room. "This is Great Aunt Walburga's place, isn't it?" "Oh, this is yours?" Well, obviously it wasn't his, not legally, but Harry had forgotten the twisted knots these pureblood families tied their lines into. He now recalled that there was indeed a neatly embroidered rendition of a young Draco Malfoy on the family tapestry hanging in the sitting room. He hoped Draco wasn't about to get any ideas about wresting ownership of the home from Harry now. Draco only shrugged, though. "I suppose it was meant to be at some point." Harry didn't quite know what to do with that. "Do you, want a tool, or what? Don't be daft. It's some ungodly hour, as you said." He eased off the mattress, brushing imagined lint from the robes he wore. This time not the thin shift he favoured in the manor, but something more appropriate for travelling. He cast about the room, and Harry sensed a strange emotion he hadn't felt from Draco before. A curious amalgamation of confusion, shame, and curiosity. "I've disturbed your sleep." "Oh, no, it's fine. It was an observation, not an apology." Harry released a long, exasperated exhalation. "Right. Was there anything else you needed that couldn't wait until morning?" Draco's eyes were still tracking around the room, and he even reached out to trace the moulding on Harry's wardrobe. It had been Sirius's once upon a time, and if Draco dared open it, he'd find some rather racy posters plastered up that Harry had not been able to take down. At least the ones on the wall Harry had been able to cover up. You just didn't want strangers winking and staring at you when you were trying to sleep was all, and trying to wank in front of them was right out. Draco's jaw tensed, and Harry felt an answering flare of that same strange emotion, so he tried to pass it. "Did you want to stay?" It wasn't an invitation, at least Harry hadn't meant it as such. It was supposed to be a straight question, trying to discern what exactly it was Draco had shown up for in the middle of the night with what Harry took to be a less than urgent problem. Certainly it was one they needed to bring to Hermione, but as long as Draco kept the ring on his finger, he was in no obvious danger of turning into a peacock and having a family reunion in the manor gardens. Draco, though, took it entirely the wrong way, of course. "What?" He whirled on Harry. "Of course not. You couldn't pay me to stay here." He gave an exaggerated shudder, and that told Harry he was both very close to the mark, but had still shot rather wide of it. "Yeah," he said. "It's a fixer-upper for sure. A bit too big for one person. I've been trying to get Andromeda and Teddy to move in, but they won't be moved from the Tonks home. Probably too many memories to give it up just yet, so I can't say I blame them." "Andromeda," Draco repeated softly, half to himself. "Not Andromeda Black?" "Yeah. Well, Tonks, after she got married." Harry paused in thought. "So, wait, that'd make her your aunt. So she's still alive?" Harry nodded. "And with a grandson. Oh, you'd be related to him too then, wouldn't you? Some manner of cousin, I guess? His name's Teddy. Well, Edward, technically, but everyone calls him Teddy. Really sweet kid. I'm his godfather, actually. You? A father? Godfather, and... yeah. Why is that so difficult to imagine? I like kids, and I'm a very good influence. Draco quirked his brows as if to say, I'm sure you think you are. What, like you'd be so much better? I might just. You've no idea how I behave with children. Perhaps I have a natural rapport with them. If so, it'd only be because you act like one yourself. And Draco gave him another look at those 2 fingers from earlier, and Harry couldn't help the soft, gruff chuckle he released in response, which itself forced Draco's lips into a thin line that in this dim light almost looked like a smile. Probably a trick of the light. That odd emotion from earlier was beginning to fade, and even the fear and panic was starting to draw back, replaced by an odd calm that Harry was unsure was coming from him or from Draco. The excitement from only moments ago was waning, and exhaustion was threatening to draw Harry back down into his very comfortable bed. He couldn't sit here chatting all night, but at the same time he didn't want to tell Draco to fuck off, even if Draco would have, and had, done the same to him had their situations been reversed. So since Draco wasn't going to ask it, not in a million years, Harry did, because the worst Draco could say would be, fuck no. My room. What? Draco said, distracted now by the footboard where he had likely found the crudely carved Sirius and James BFFs forever. The room I stayed in at the manor. What of it? I thought maybe if you hadn't let it out, I might move back in. Just, until Hermione looks into this and tells us we're in the clear. Draco straightened immediately, and Harry could practically feel the line of tension drawing tight across his shoulders. No, absolutely not. You're delusional. He scoffed and shook his head. You're exhausted. Go back to sleep. This was a mistake. What? He slid from the bed, dragging the covers with him to wrap around his midsection, and hobbled after Draco, who was heading for the door, presumably to find old Byrne. Not for forever, obviously, but maybe if I'm around in physical proximity, the curse won't reactivate even if you take the ring off. And if something's gone wrong and you start having fits again, then, well, I'll be there. He didn't quite know what he'd be there for, only that, well, he kind of wanted to be there. It didn't sit right, the thought of Draco having to work his way through these transformations all alone. Even if Harry couldn't really do anything, at least Draco wouldn't have to suffer by himself. But, of course, he knew full well that was exactly what Draco wanted, to not have anyone witness his lowest, meanest moments, so Harry shouldn't have been surprised when Draco snapped back, How many times do I have to tell you I don't want your fucking pity? And how many times do I have to tell you that I'm not offering it out of pity? Oh, yes, my mistake. You're doing it for a much worse reason. Draco leaned in close, grey eyes dark and stormy. Because you need to be needed, and I'm just desperate enough to bite. And maybe Draco had a point that Harry did have a bit of a saving people thing, as Hermione had put it once. But he didn't quite think this was it, and maybe if he started being a little bit more honest with himself, Draco might feel all right doing the same. If that's how you see it, then there isn't much I can do about it, but I promise you it's not that. I've already scratched that itch with the ceremony proper. Well, at least you recognize it, Draco scoffed, pulling back, and Harry snapped a hand out, grabbing him by the wrist. He frowned down at the grip Harry had on him. Want to lose that hand? No, I want to go back to the manor. Draco roughly shook him off, and I said absolutely not, and that I was delusional. I know, I was here when you said it 30 seconds ago. The thing is, you said that because you thought I pitied you, or that I only said so because I wanted to save you or something, which isn't why I want to go back. Then enlighten me. Harry shrugged. I miss you. Draco recoiled, taking several measured steps back. That's... You do not? Yeah, all right, maybe that's not quite right, but I did kind of like it. It was nice being around someone who wasn't a house elf, especially someone who provided as thrilling company as you. And you want to throw yourself back into all that, right? You are delusional. I don't need to deal with this. Old Byrne! The elf instantly appeared at his feet with a sharp crack that would probably have gotten them noise complaints from the neighbours without the magical shielding. Let's be off. Old Byrne, no, not yet. Draco and I are having a conversation. Well, ignore him, Old Byrne. As your master, I command you to return me to the manor. And as also your master, I command you to... You aren't his master? I married you, didn't I? You going to tell me your mum didn't have as much say over the house elf's dispensation as your dad? Draco sputtered incoherently, and Harry leaned forward, hands on his knees, to tell old Byrne, "Just give us a few minutes, yeah? I'm sure I can get this sorted." Old Byrne glanced between them, his sour expression growing even more rotten, but he seemed genuinely unsure of what he was meant to do in a situation like this, so Harry took his chance, turning back to Draco. "How are you ever going to get to be someone's favourite person if you never let anyone get close?" Draco looked livid. "I don't want to be your favourite person, so that's none of your concern." Harry held his arms out. "Well, I'm all you've got right now. And I might be all you've got for a while, so maybe we don't have to be best chums, but I actually thought it was kind of nice when we were getting along there right at the end. I'm not bored when you're around. That's not faint praise. I'm saying you keep me on my toes. Even if I'm on my toes because I've got to stop you from taking stupid potshots at my bad hair or a spot on my nose I had the misfortune to wake up with." He shrugged. I like it when my friends take the piss out of me." "We aren't friends," Draco sputtered, as if Harry had just called him the very worst slur. "Yeah, we aren't. Doesn't that seem kind of silly, given we're married? I know you said you didn't want to be your spouse's friend, but, I mean, it seems like a decent enough place to start, doesn't it? If you can't be their favourite person, you can at least be someone they like. I'm not saying contort your personality into knots. I'm not even saying be decent to me. Just be yourself, and maybe allow me to be myself in your general vicinity. Then we can see where things go." Draco was still shaking his head, though with depleting energy. No, you don't need anything. You don't need me, not anymore, and you know that. But you came here all the same because you wanted me to do something about it, even though you know there's fuck all I can do, except listen to you talk yourself hoarse. So maybe you don't need anything, but you're allowed to want stuff. You're allowed to be a snotty little 11-year-old who just wants someone to stand there and think he's the most interesting person in the world. And I'm allowed to be that someone. So be the lord of the damn manor and let me come back, and then we'll figure out how to handle this together." And he could almost physically see Draco trying to hold himself back, still clinging to his reins and trying desperately not to be dragged off. So Harry waited him out, looking to old Byrne to take his temperature on the matter. The old house elf had his eyes closed and was snoring softly. Fat lot of help he was going to be. "Old Byrne," Harry said, poking him in the knee, "take us back to the manor." Draco looked very much like he wanted to protest, but nothing came out, and Harry quickly and quietly gathered his things. He hadn't even entirely unpacked his suitcase from the last time he'd visited, so it was no trouble to toss half his wardrobe into its spaciously magically expanded interior, snap it shut, and hold out his hand for old Byrne to take. Old Byrne cast one last glance at Draco for permission or forbiddance, but as he found neither, he reluctantly reached for Draco's hand as well, and as a unit, they disappeared with a crack. It was only after he'd bid Draco and old Byrne a good night that was not returned and crawled under his freshly laundered bedsheets in his room at Malfoy Manor that Harry realized he hadn't warned Kreacher he would be away.